Hey there, I am Adrian Fort, but I call myself an aristocrat, and we are here for a spoiler-filled review of Logan. So if you have not seen the movie, stop this right now, go spend the money, see the movie, it's fantastic, then come back and watch. This, by the way, is Logan, but it is also one of my patrons and friends, Amy. So hello, Amy. Oh. Seems to be covered in cigar ash, which, what could be more fitting, except that I don't think, this might be the first incarnation of Logan that we see where he does not have a cigar in his mouth, and that is probably so that we do not confuse his coughing with the fact that he has lung cancer or something. But without further ado, let's get right into the review. What is the best scene in Logan? And I think that the best scene in this movie either has to be Charles Xavier's death or Logan's death. Spoilers. But since I can't decide on either one, I'm going to go a different route completely, and I'll say that instead of the best scene, I think I'll talk about the most important scene. And the most important scene in this movie is the opening scene, because there are so many things that we have to be sold on immediately. One, boy is this rated R. We come out of the gates swinging. We come out of the gates swinging in magnificent fashion. And you have to buy into that immediately. You also have to buy into the fact that this is a much different and more violent Wolverine than you've seen in the past. Older, more negative, a much different Logan character than you've ever been exposed to. And you have to accept the fact that probably your favorite or one of your favorite superhero characters has been relegated to driving a limo to earn a living. And if you're not willing to do that, you're out immediately, right? But that first scene makes things so easy to accept. It does everything so well that you're along for the ride. So what is the worst scene in Logan? I don't think, this was a much harder question because I don't think that there is a bad scene in this movie, which is very difficult to pull off when you're talking about a 2+ hour movie. But I think when Logan gets to the camp with the kids, I think he falls asleep one too many times. It just seems like that sequence could be a little bit more succinct, because it seems like we're getting into deja vu territory with it. He falls asleep on the way there, he falls asleep again on the way there, he falls asleep when he finds the camp, he falls asleep on the way up to the camp, he falls asleep in the camp, he falls asleep in the camp, he falls asleep in the camp. And it seems like there's something could have been cut there and we wouldn't have lost anything. And the Oscar goes to, who was the best performer in this movie? Was anyone bad? Jackman plays a much different Logan character than we've ever seen before, but he keeps him within the Logan wheelhouse. This is a recognizable incarnation of the character, but a much different incarnation of the character. While and whereas Patrick Stewart takes the Professor X character and breaks him completely, and you're still able to identify that character, more than just by saying Patrick Stewart. Richard Grant as Dr. Rice was so two-faced that he's already in the Democratic primary for 2020. That was a fantastic performance, and I hope that character returns in some form, whether it's a prequel or just a different era for the character. The timelines don't matter in Fox anyway. Boyd Holbrook as Pierce was so good that you just know you're going to see him popping up in bigger and bigger roles in the future. But I don't think that you can rightly give the Oscar for this movie to anyone other than Dafne Keen. You would almost have to give the best performance in a movie like this to a child actor simply for not ruining the movie. But she does so much more than not ruin the movie. She steals scenes from Hugh Jackman, and she steals scenes from Patrick Stewart. And that is no small feat. Now, jumping into the review part itself, the first thing that I really want to comment on is the theme song for this movie. It sounds a lot like the Freddy Krueger theme and Moonlight Sonata had a baby. This is a song that immediately lets you know that all does not end well. And it's such a fantastic touch in a movie that doesn't have to have that. This movie would have been 99% this movie without that song. But that song is haunting. And every time it comes up, it is like minimalism in literature, in that every time it comes up, it adds something to the scene. It takes something and builds on it each time you hear it. Which leads me to my next point. This movie delivers chills for two reasons for comic book fans. One, that ambiance of a horror film that this has many times over, especially when X-24 shows up. But two, I remember people saying that they got chills during Batman Begins during the swear to me scene, because that was just so Batman. And I remember the people who got the chills from the Avengers in that the twirl around scene, right, when the Avengers assemble. Those scenes never did it for me because Wolverine was the character that I really grew up with. But that scene where Wolverine goes berserker on the Reavers as he is first escaping from the ranch, that scene gave me the chills because it was so quintessentially the Wolverine character. Now, I've said for 5 years now that the Avengers is the best comic book movie of all time, and that The Dark Knight is the best movie about a comic book character of all time. I think this movie is as comic bookish as the Avengers when you really get into the sci-fi sort of things going on, plus all of the characters that have been thrown in. And I think that it is as good, or nearly as good, as The Dark Knight. Plus, when you throw on top of that the fact that it makes the Wolverine character as current and as relevant as Iron Man made Tony Stark in 2008, I think that you've really got a lot of things going on here. And basically what I'm saying is that this is the golden age of comic book movies. And this thing, Logan, is as good as any that I've seen in a long time, and I think that it deserves a spot on the Mount Rushmore. And I think the reason that this works well is that on a basic level, for a movie to work, there has to be a good story. This movie has a great story. For a movie to be memorable as a cinematic experience, it has to have good acting, as that is what sells a movie as a movie experience. Which is where, with a lot of sci-fi films, you get that dichotomy. It was a great story, not a great movie, right? This has great acting in spades. This movie has the best all-around acting from every angle that I've seen in a long time. Like, when I think of movies on this par as far as each character delivering what that character has to deliver, for me it was on the level of Gladiator, where even the small characters, the bit roles, really do exactly what they have to do. So beyond that, that next level is cinematic literature. That next level of cinematic literature is reached with the introduction of irony. Wolverine is a suicidal character who is basically immortal. There's irony. To transcend the literature into something truly beautiful, something truly breathtaking, you have to do-si-do the irony. You give the suicidal character of Wolverine a reason to live, X-23. You take the immortal character, here again, Wolverine, and you kill them with A himself, X-24, and one of the things that adds greatly to his immortality, namely the adamantium, which is poisoning him, which I think a lot of... that was very easy to overlook in this movie. Just to write off the adamantium being the thing that is killing him, but it's also the thing that basically makes him immortal. In addition to his healing factor, of course. So I think in every movie review there is room for a bit of conjecture. So I'd like to start that here. This is where the X-Men deserve to play. This R-rated sandbox, this very dirty and gritty universe. Forget the massive budgets. Go back Go back to a line from Wolverine from the first X-Men. This is a way that we can do this. The Rogue character asks him when he pops out his claws, does it hurt? And he says, every time. These characters, these mutants, suffer through their powers. And in that way, these movies should have an element of survival horror. Now, survival horror goes back to the Resident Evil game. If you're not familiar with that, basically you had to find ammunition in a zombie environment and able to use said ammunition. You didn't have much. You had to conserve it. In this way, these movies don't have to be big effects extravaganzas. So let's take the most extreme case to prove this point. How do you make an R-rated, low-budget movie about a character like Cyclops, who has a very out there, a very visual-oriented power, and he is a Boy Scout? You treat his powers like lightsabers in the original Star Wars. Their power is a marvel, so they only make brief appearances, right? You bring that power out when that power has to be used. You don't bring it out otherwise. And how do you put an R-rated environment around a character like Cyclops? Well, that scene for the manifestation of his powers, if you decide to have a flashback in a high school classroom, would be pretty brutal. It would be a one-effect shot that would destroy your audience. But Scott Summers, again, is the Boy Scout. A Boy Scout existing in an R-rated world makes him respectable and interesting versus the boring character that we've gotten in the previous iterations of Cyclops. Which is to say nothing about James Marsden, right? He looked a lot like Cyclops, he talked like Cyclops, presented himself like Cyclops, but he came across as hokey because it was a PG-13 world, right? He was supposed to exist there. And one of the final thoughts that I have on this movie, it is such a goddamn shame that Boyd Holbrook played Pierce, because screw Channing Tatum, that guy is Gambit. He's edgy, he's charming, he's cunning, everything that the character of Gambit needs to be to hold your attention on screen, that guy has it. But it is nice to know absolutely that guy's going to pop up in more and more things down the line because he was so good. So a rating. I give this movie 97 snicks out of 100. And for me, that gets right up there. That gets right up there on the Mount Rushmore of comic book movies. So, what recommendation do I have for Logan? What other movies should you see? Go watch The Dark Knight, The Avengers, Iron Man, and Winter Soldier, and decide where you rank this, because this movie is absolutely up there on that Mount Rushmore. So thank you for watching. If you like this sort of thing, hit like and subscribe. You can also find me at Strip Cover Lit, which is where I talk about books and literature and writing, things like that. I am on Twitter at Adrian Anyway, and I hope to see you next time.